Hello and welcome to the DIY McLeod channel. Thanks for checking out the video. If you do enjoy videos like this, please remember to like and subscribe. After taking a second to stare at awe at this vise, I decided it was time to set it up. I went to my workbench, figured out exactly where I wanted it to have its permanent home, next to the miter saw, but in a place that wouldn't interfere with the miter saw, and I knew I needed it to overhang from the bench enough where I could put longer pieces in without it hitting the workbench. In order to do this, I knew the front two holes would have to go in with lag bolts, and the back two holes would go through the bench top. The problem was, the bench top didn't have enough support, so I ended up cutting a 2x6 to use as a backer board underneath the bench top, and that worked out really well, as you'll see later in the setup part of the video. One thing I will say up front is you need to be very particular with where you put the bolts. If you want the head to face a certain direction, you cannot have a bolt directly below it, because you would have the potential when you go to swivel the vise head that you would run into the bolt. And before we even get into some of that, I would like to point out this is a very heavy vise. So as you're setting it up, just understand that when you're putting it on the edge of your bench top, this thing wants to lean forward. And it will. So with myself, I knew that if it fell, I wasn't going to try to catch it. It's too heavy, it's too dense. I was just going to let it fall. I tried to ensure that that wasn't going to happen, but just going in, I knew that I had to get away if it did fall. It's that heavy. So just be careful when setting this up. Work smart. I ended up using a drill guide to drill straight down into the bench top to ensure my holes were straight, and that worked out well. I will say that for the lag bolts, I was using 1/2 inch lag bolts because I didn't want to put a 5/8 inch lag bolt into the 2x4 below, and I really wanted most of the weight to be held with the two 5x8 bolts towards the back. In case anything ever went wrong, I wanted those bolts to hold out the best. And this video is mostly going to be the setup of the vise, because really I just bought this thing. I haven't had too much of a chance to use it, but right away I know I love it, and so I am very happy with it. And if you want to see the vise in the end, you can skip to about halfway or 2/3 through the video and you'll end up seeing it. But setting this vise up is definitely an important step. I ended up reinforcing the corners of my workbench as well. This is a Home Depot workbench. I don't even think they sell it anymore. But I ended up reinforcing the corners with 2 extra 2x4s per corner, and then also a strap across the middle of the 2 legs. And this was just to ensure that this side of the workbench had the stability I wanted. And then I attached this workbench on the other side to a second workbench. So I feel the workbench itself is very secure, and that's kind of what you need in this situation. For the 5/8 inch back holes, I didn't have a standard drill bit. I had a flat drill bit in order to drill those, and I didn't have a drill guide for 5/8 inch either. So I used one of the steel washers I had in order to guide the drill bit around the circle correctly, and I just went really slow with that until I got deep enough to drill through successfully. And the holes lined up really well, except for one was literally a millimeter off, if that, and so I just went through really quick with the drill bit one more time once the vise was on there, and the bolt went in with a little smack from a rubber hammer. But in the end, it worked out really well. I will say is putting in those lag bolts took some effort, and I'm happy it did, because it means the vise isn't going anywhere. And like I said earlier, I wanted the weight to be stabilized in the back more so than even the front, and in order to do that, I tightened the 2 back bolts first. So I tightened the 5/8 inch bolts. I used a lock bolt or a lock nut underneath to bolt into that 2x6 backer board, and you can see there that it worked out really well. I was happy with how this all turned out. The backer board was screwed into the 2x4s of the bench. You can kind of see my extra legs there for the reinforcement of the corners of the bench itself, and I feel like this is a really strong setup. I'm not concerned about it at all as far as any stability issues, and it really doesn't have any now that I've used it to hammer on already and to saw through. The vise is not going anywhere. The vise will have a little wiggle in the head while it's open, but once clamped down, that goes away. I really hope this video helps some people if they're concerned about how to set up the vise. The positioning I used was so that I could still use my miter saw without the wood or whatever I'm cutting interfering with it, as long as the vise is turned in this direction. So I made sure that it would line up in a place that wouldn't interfere with the length of any material on the miter saw. As far as the vise itself goes, the whole reason I purchased this vise is because I had been making some putters for golf. Just for fun, really. So I have a CNC machine, and you may have seen some of my other videos where I was machining putter heads and then putting them on the shafts and then putting the grips on the shaft. Well, when I was putting the grip on the shaft, I realized how horrible my other vise setup was. And it was a $20 vise or something like that, so I understand why it was not holding properly. And I thought, this is a purchase worth making a good vise. So I started doing some research, and I started watching YouTube videos about different vises. And I really realized I wanted a head that could rotate on the vise. And then I was looking at the difference between those, and a lot of them seemed very similar. And this one stood out from all the rest. And I get it. This vise is amazing. Like, the strength, the pure beauty of the vise. I mean, for a tool, it's hard to say, but it's true. As soon as I opened the box, I could tell this was a tool or an item that I wanted to keep. And that is exciting for owning so many tools and finding one that I go, yeah, I can't believe I haven't had this for a long time. So as far as purchasing this vise, I could not be happier. I've only used it maybe 10 times in the week I've had it, and I could not be happier with it. I cannot wait to continue to use it on projects. And just from watching other reviews of different vices out there and similar models, but they always had some complaints about the vise, and I realized that this is something that I'm going to use often, and I wanted to make sure I got a piece of equipment that I'd be happy with. And I am happy with this. The rotation works perfectly, the head rotation works perfectly, as well as the base, and so that is what I wanted it for. As far as stability, it's there. This makes it really easy to cut through the shafts, really easy to put the grips on, and really easy to file down the shafts after. And that's not all I'm going to use it for, but that's kind of what I ran it through in the first few days. And so I'm really excited. It's huge. I like to think it's almost the size of a microwave or something. It's a gigantic piece of equipment. So if this video helped in any way, consider subscribing. Trying to improve my channel, so consider doing that.